up, everybody? I'm Blessed and Free. Welcome back to another episode of DOC TV. So you guys already know I like to bring guests on this channel that have been to prison, but today we got kind of a special guest. He was actually a Gambino crime associate for the Mafia. So I'm going to go ahead and let him introduce himself. His name's Anthony Russo. And so where did life start for you, man? Like how was your upbringing growing up?
I came from a very poor background. My mother and father were Sicilian immigrants. My father, more so, came after World War II in the 60s. I grew up in a little area called City Line. City Line is the borderline of East New York, Brooklyn, and Ozone Park, Queens. Probably the largest Cosa Nostra, that's what we call it, area in the world. There's a avenue called the 101st Avenue, which I'm sure if anybody knows about Cosa Nostra, where John Gotti Sr.'s social club was, but it wasn't just his social club. Even before he opened up one, all five families had social clubs just on that avenue. So like 101st Avenue was like a farm system, a breeding ground for organized crime.
When I was in prison, I read this book called The Five Families. I was always into the mob stories and everything. And you always hear about that street, and you hear about even all those the boroughs you were talking about, like the Ozone Park and Bay Ridge and all that. So like when you say you grew up poor, is that kind of what led you into the life? Was so you could, do well for yourself and get money, or how did all that go down?
No, because at a young age, at 5, I wanted to be a street guy.
Okay.
I didn't know. I didn't know the difference. That's I know if you listen to my podcasts, you'll hear the difference between street guys, wise guys, gangsters. There's a big difference between all of that. And I just wanted to be a street guy. I was in the streets at 5. I was, hanging around the big wigs. In my neighborhood, they didn't peer pressure you into the life. It's easy. Either you latched onto a family by being around them, or you picked one and you try to do things to get noticed, or things like that. And I was just 5. I was a rough and tough kid. I was a bad kid. I was a neighborhood kid, so I did everything the neighborhood kids did. All my friends were older than me. Nobody, I didn't hang around guys that were younger than me. I was learning how to, rob bikes, steal cars, ride dirt bikes, learning how to ride motorcycles, drive stick shift at a young age. I just wanted to be part of the life. I didn't know I was that poor. I knew we ate meat like once a week, and I didn't have the clothes I wanted. And, we lived in, walk-up tenement apartment with the mice and the roaches. But to me, I had a great childhood. I didn't realize it till I was 13. And, I lost my parents, and I realized how poor we were. And then it was like, at 10, I was really out there hustling a little bit. By 13, I was already full-fledged, learning how to cook crack and sell drugs. And, I had the best of both worlds. I had East New York and Ozone Park. So I was getting a great education, and I was going to school every day. I loved school. I couldn't get enough of it. I didn't want to be anything but a gangster or a street guy. So I focused on that, but I always wanted to be the smartest guy in the room. So I always wanted to have an education.
All right. Yeah, that makes sense. Especially in that life, you always got to be one step ahead of the next guy. You know what I'm saying? So, so when you said like you started cooking crack, was that really what your street life entailed, was being like a dope dealer and stuff like that? Or did it involve like anything else, like running money tickets or gaming or any of that stuff?
When I was young, I would run football tickets. Those were these little slips. You probably remember them from jail. You would get a slip with your teams. We started that in the prison system. I did one upstate New York, but in the streets, we had guys that had those. And we run these slips over to the bar 77, or run over to the cafe on 76th Street, or, things like that. And I never ran errands. But when I went full-fledged with the Cosa Nostra, I was like 17, 18, and I was already, my name was already known in the streets. I was already an established drug dealer, established street guy, bookmaker, Shylock. I was already doing that all on my own, under the hub of different crime families, but mainly the Gambino crime family, which was my mentors. Ronnie One-Arm Trucchio, right now he's in the, federal compound doing life. He was one of my biggest mentors. Another gentleman, older fella, who was running an office for Nicky Carrazzo, who was Ronnie One-Arm's mentor. A lot of people think that was John Sr., but it wasn't. It was Nicholas Carrazzo, who was a man in his own right and a gangster to the bone, still is doing, you know, big time, big numbers, you know, in the federal pen. And that's what I was around. That's what I seen. They mentored me. They showed me the life. They taught me things. And I was already seasoned and ready to go at 17 or 18. But the whole cook and crack thing was, I was more on the Brooklyn side as a kid. And I remember asking my father when the Jordan 3s came out. I was a big basketball guy, a big, you know, fashion guy since I was a kid, all the urban wear. And I said, listen, I knew better because I couldn't get Puma suedes. If I can't afford Puma suedes, I couldn't get Jordans. They were $99 at the time. That's how expensive they were back then. You talk about 88.
Yeah,
I was
that's
11 years old.
expensive.
Yeah, you know, I remember it was 108.25 with tax because that's how much it was when I bought my first pair. And I went to my father and I was like, and one of those things where you don't ask a Sicilian parent for nothing, you just wind up getting a crack in the mouth. You're not getting anything but food on the table and a roof over your head, and lucky at that. And I was like, wow, Dad, you know, I was just so hyped up. I was a big basketball player at the time. I loved playing ball. You know, the Knicks had a great team. Jordan was just unbelievable. He just won the dunk contest. You know, you're going crazy. There's no cable at the time. I'm sure kids had it, but you know what? We're staying up just to see Saturday afternoon basketball. And I was like, Dad, you know, I really want these new Jordan. And he didn't understand. He wasn't racist because as I got older, he didn't care that I watched BET or MTV or hip hop or whatever I listened to. But, you know, he was like, you're not getting that street garbage. When you're able to afford it, you could get it. That's when you'll be able to get it. And I was like, all right. From that day on, I was 11 years old. I remember I wasn't able to get them until 1989 when the Jordan 4s came out, which they used didn't do the right thing. And I got them. I said, all right, if that's the thing, I'll make my own money. And I was hustling little weed bags. I'd run up to the Jamaican pot dealers, and you know, they didn't want to sell to me at first. And I ran game on them. I told them who I was, where I was from. I was like, we don't do that shit. You know, playing that whole Italian thing, you know. And they wound up selling to me. And they wouldn't sell to any, you know, body that was light eyes, light skin like myself in Brooklyn, you know. But they did, and I would run them back down into Queens and sell them for $10, and that's where it started. And then I ran to playing baseball. I ran into a Dominican guy where his nephew had played on my baseball team in Brooklyn, and I knew he was the jewelry, the money, the cars. I knew he was a drug dealer. He wound up being, you know, running a corner, meaning like back then they had crack corners, and he was one of managing a corner, you know, and that was his job. And he taught me the game, you know, went a little bit. I pretty much learned the rest through a couple other people, but he taught me about cooking, about how you turn cocaine powder into crack cocaine. There's 3 different ways of cooking it. You bake it, ammonia. You can mix it with baking soda. You cook it on the stove. There's a couple different microwaves. There was a lot of things, a lot of ways that he taught me, and I was off and running from there.
So I assume after, you know, that you started selling dope and shit, you pretty much were getting any kind of shoes you wanted then.
No dope. Dope was a death sentence. You get caught selling dope in my neighborhood, you get killed.
Well, I mean dope as in like crack. That's what kind of,
Oh
I
yeah,
guess
yeah,
it's
yeah,
called
yeah,
different up there. Like,
yeah.
yeah, they call like heroin dog food. You know, sometimes they
Yeah.
call heroin dope and crack dope in Florida. So really they're calling everything dope these days down here.
So they call dope dog food down there? I didn't know that because when I got into, somebody wrote something out in California and they really didn't get it. And I know what the guy was talking about. He said, Hootie looks like he's on that dog food. So I responded back to the guy. I'm like, well, you trying to hide that? You trying to tell people I'm doing heroin or something? And he got surprised. Like, he was like, really? But yeah, no, I mean, like we called it papaya, heroin, H, dog food. That, you know, crack
Yeah.
cocaine was crack. Crack was crack in the 80s and the early 90s, and that was it. You know, there was no other name for it.
So when you said like the dope thing, like heroin and stuff, did you only sell crack because the mafia had the heroin on lock, or did they not want you selling H?
You see, there's a big thing behind that with the mafia having heroin on H. People don't really get it. They just hear it from the outside looking in.
Right,
That
right.
nobody in the mafia knows how to sell drugs. Not gangsters. There's maybe a few people that, but the hardcore old school guys that they call heroin dealers, they may have made moves or got pipelines or shook down guys who sold dope, but they didn't literally themselves go and pick up the dope and taste it like the movies. Like the movies show you at a meeting place with 20 guys on one side, 20 guys on the other side. Because I wind up becoming a connect, and I was moving 100 pounds of marijuana every 5 days, kilos. I never had to do that in my life. money and drugs were never in the same place. I never had to walk over and test it. I never had to, he had to count the money first. All that shit you've seen in the movies does not happen. You know, you make a connect, you make a move, or you're shaking down a guy that has the move. And heroin wasn't on lockdown in our neighborhoods. There was no heroin allowed. And no crack was allowed. In the bars, everybody partied back then. You're coming out of the 80s, which was cocaine was used. So everybody's doing cocaine. Girls, guys, everybody's sniffing cocaine. So cocaine's around. So I cook an 8-ball. I cook a half ounce. I cook an ounce. That's how it just, and it just turned into where everybody, so I kind of stood on more of the Brooklyn side, but it was still Queens, just maybe 2 or 3 blocks out of Brooklyn, pushing the crack. And then eventually to another part of Queens, and eventually back into the cocaine business. But the heroin thing just was, it was a garbage drug. It was a low life drug. You know, guys are dying in Harlem. People are ODing in Harlem. You know, it's a needle game. It just wasn't something that you just didn't do in my neighborhoods. It wasn't something. And if you get caught selling any drugs, you're going to get your beat and you're going to get your finger cut off. So like they didn't spread the drugs throughout their neighborhood. They shook down drug dealers. They got connects. They had pipelines. They moved it from one to the other. Other people handled it. It ain't like people think in Cosa Nostra. There ain't the boss of the crime family going up and meeting Pablo and getting, 100 tons of cocaine shipped in every month. It's just all bullshit. It really is. I'm not saying nobody in the market, they sell drugs. They do. Drugs has been around since Vito Genovese had the biggest pipeline of heroin coming from getting it from Turkey, bringing it to Sicily, processing it, and bringing it back to the U.S. But
that was in the tomato, the pizza. He owned the pizza shops.
No. The pizza connection was recently.
I read about that in a book.
Yeah, those were the guy Totorina and Tommy Bouchard that wanted to be in a boss that went back, came here and testified for the pizza connection. The pizza connection was mainly the Bonanno family in Ridgewood. It was a chain of pizzerias that was just getting, tons and tons. And there was other people involved. Carmine Galante was part of that. He was one of the reasons why they clipped him. It was just huge in that part of the area. So you're talking about the late 70s, early 80s, mid 80s, because they got pinched in the mid 80s. And yeah, they were having it shipped over with the tomato sauce, the olives, and all the ingredients that you use to cook pizza. And there was a string of pizzerias throughout Ridgewood and other parts of the city that shipments came through. And other families were involved, not just, there was probably Gambino guys. I know there was, Colombo guys. There was other families involved. It was mainly Bonanno. It was really a Sicilian thing. A majority of the Sicilians were Bonannos. So yeah, but that was probably the pipeline that came from Vito Genovese 50 years before.
Right. That's what I was just thinking.
I was going back to, the early days when they formed the commission. They were still doing drugs. It was Don Carlo that made the rule deal and die. Cosa Nostra was always involved. I think it was 1970 something. I think it was after Appalachia, maybe late 60s, where they made the rule deal and die. But they were always involved in that game. It was the power game. And Vito Genovese went back to Sicily after he got out of jail here because he got deported and just crushed the game. He was the kingpin down there.
Yeah. So out of your whole time, man, living in the street life, what do you think was the craziest thing you saw?
Well, could you just imagine this? Gosh, at 8 years old, I used to think we had to be in when the street light was on because our parents just wanted us in. But then you have to realize they used to kick us out at 8 in the morning. They never wanted us home. If we got in trouble at school, if we got into fights, we would get beaten, but then we were allowed back out in the street. We never got punished. We never got things taken. We didn't have anything to have taken away. So I always thought it was that, but then you have to really think about it. Every morning, you got a bunch of 8-year-old kids waking up, sitting on a stoop. You know how it is in Brooklyn, sitting on a stoop, hanging out in the morning, talking about the dead body they found the night before.
That's crazy.
So it's like, if you're growing up like that and, people are worried about mommy issues and who's going to have anxiety from learning about World War II in classrooms today. I'm like, they don't really have a clue, Yeah. But at about 5 or 6, I think it was 6, a neighborhood kid, a neighborhood tough, you're talking about, regular stand-up kid from the neighbor that knew how to fight. Couple, Spanish guys cut him up with machetes in front of my house. Channel 11 News was there. Kadi Chung was there at the time. And my mother was I woke up to like shining lights, and I look out my bedroom window and there's a kid from the neighborhood laying on the floor dead, all cut up and, chopped up, dead in front of right by my doorstep.
So you were already like desensitized to the violence then.
That was my farm system to Rikers Island. That's, I guess, we were going into, because I don't think I would have ever survived in a prison like that, being 139 pounds, 5'4", light eyes, dark jet black pushback kid looking like a pretty boy like I did, and I always get passed for that, even to today. And that's why you always see me dressed down with a baseball cap, with like, I do my hair, your hairline's fake, your eyes. I looked like a real pretty boy, and there was no way that I was going to survive in these prisons if I didn't grow up the way I did. And I was thankful for that, as bad as it was.
Yeah. So what was it that led you to Rikers Island? Like, I guess your first time we could start with, and how did all that go down?
I don't think I ever told this story. In the early 2000s, I'm killing the game. I'm in the weed game. I'm in the hydro game. I'm in the regs field, meaning regular weed, moving that from Arizona, moving BC from Canada, moving keys coming in from everywhere. I'm not really dealing with the crack that much anymore. Just getting into the pill game, the pharmaceutical game, but by weight, not by prescriptions. Just insane. So about November of 01, 02, early 2000s, I make my best month, and I'm not even moving in. I mean, if I really moved and shake this stuff, I would have been. I like to work 1-2 days a week with the drugs, pick it up, drop it off, and party, hang out. I was always around. I was having kids at the time. I just got married. I was buying my first house, cars, vacations. I just wanted to live. There was a lot of guys that came from the way I did and saved. I spent because I earned in any street thing that was going on. Besides women, we didn't mess with women, and we didn't mess with heroin. It's two things we did. My crew, my guys, everybody, we had so much respect. We loved women. We loved hanging out with women. We couldn't do that. We were all Italian kids. We had mothers and sisters, and I helped raise a younger sister after my parents, passed. And I'm glad I came up in a crew like that. We didn't mess with women. We didn't mess with heroin. There was a lot of things that we didn't do that was heinous crimes to us. But I pulled in about 100,000 that November.
Damn.
That October, right? Yeah, October I pulled in 100,000. One of my friends gets his a message. He's going to be straightened out. Get out of the game, because if you get penalized in the life, it's called 5 years. They shelf you for 5 years. They did it to me a few times. I don't know why. I wind up finding out a good friend of mine was holding me back, and they couldn't even find. I never got a day in jail for selling drugs. So that'll come later on, I guess, in the conversation.
So your friend that you were, in the life with was hating on you, and he threw you under the bus, and then they said, okay, you're done for a little while. Is that how that went down?
What happened was he got robbed for 100 and something thousand, 170,000. It was a sick number. Guy didn't know that it was his money. He was keeping it in somebody else's name in a safety deposit box, and the kid's name that the box was in seen a quick way to make cash with a guy from the Lucchese family. He didn't know. He knew the guy was a moneymaker. The guy was definitely a hustler. So the guy was like, listen, get me this money. They were doing a ticket scam with Ticketmaster. He's like, we'll flip it. These tickets flip the next day. We'll both make about 50,000 on, can you get your hands on this kind of money? He knew that the kid was around money. He was around us. He didn't necessarily know how close. So the kid empties out like a safety deposit box that we were keeping for some. We did keep money for people that were in jail. We did do the right thing with things like that. Our crew was pretty good. That's why I went into the life at 17, 18 with these guys, because we were more like brothers than friends. And I knew the treachery. I knew all the bullshit, because people think Cosa Nostra is watered down and bad now. Cosa Nostra was watered down and bad 100 years ago. They were raping. They were scumbags. They were drug dealers. They were lowlifes. They gave women hot shots to keep them quiet, or, if they were married and got women. You don't know. Cosa Nostra, once you get on the inside, you learn about. It ain't watered down and bad now. There ain't a lot of informants now. You talk about bosses like Joe Valachi, who was sitting in front of, the guy was a boss in his own right around the Profaci family, was in front of Congress testifying about being made and being a soldier in the organized crime, and that was back then on TV. Guys ain't doing that today. It was just as watered down then, and as many informants then as there is now. I promise you that. It's just that it catches a bad rap now because it's more in the media, where back then J. Edgar Hoover didn't want to admit that there was an organized crime, because not that he didn't have connections, and he wouldn't accept the dollar. He just didn't want to believe in that Italian race being who they were in this country. It wasn't anything where they had pictures of him blowing his intern, walking around cross-dressing, all that shit that you hear. I mean, there's so much stuff that I'm going to touch on my own podcast that is just straight bullshit, because I was old enough, a little young, but old enough to hear the old timers that were 70 and 80 that went back to those days. And I've heard a million stories. I was a social club kid, meaning I grew up around all the social. I loved being in a social club. I learned all the social club card games by the time I was 12. Like, I just loved being around the social clubs, and you would hear the stories. I loved the old timers. I loved all that stuff because I was a learning guy. I was like a sponge. I wanted to absorb it all. And so there was a lot that you learn with that. And like, the watered down life that they talk about today, it's all bullshit. It's been around like that forever. But I was going into the life with guys that I thought were my brothers. And I knew we were all going to be, something in our own right within that. And we go into it again, but, two of us get pulled out of it, me and my other friend, because we were into the drug game. He was into scores and drugs. I was into the drugs and cars at the time. And he gets the call. Already one of our friends is already going to get it, and he's on his way. His father's a boss. He's going to probably be a boss in his own right. And his guy that he worked with was going to be, straightened out any day. And then my friend but it happened to be my friend actually got it before him. So he got the call and calls me over. He's like, listen, you're making money. Come over, do this bookmaker thing, work one of the offices. You got your own things going on the side. Leave the drug game. So I leave the drug game in October. Yeah. I make 100,000 in October. I leave. I go into November. One of the kids in the offices leaves. I take his place. I'm answering phones for them. I was doing this stuff as a kid. I was still a kid at the time, but I was like really doing this as a young kid. I knew it like the back of my hand. 3 weeks later, I think I get my first pay. I get $2,800. Now you're talking about I make 100,000 in October. In November, I make 2,800. And what happens after 21 days? They kick the doors in. Organized crime, OCCIB for the state of New York, County of Queens. Didn't even know they had one.
Yeah, I never heard of that.
Yeah, there's a Queens task force. There's a New York State task force that just was involved in organized crime from the 90s into the 2000s. And they were investigating them, and they pinched us for bookmaking. And there's a RICO charge in the state. It's called enterprise corruption. Didn't have no clue about that as well. I knew about RICO. I never knew anybody who was pinched for enterprise corruption. The feds really didn't want us yet. And the detectives and, local detectives and cops, and they would never bothered us. We didn't have like a local detective who broke our balls. I couldn't even tell you any local cops' names. I could tell you the anti-crime and the OCCIBs and OCCID, all the organized crime units they had in the state, but I couldn't tell you any local guys. They never broke our balls. They'd pull us over. They let us go. They knew we were neighborhood guys, blowing lights. They could see our addresses, let us go. Local cops never broke our balls. We've seen the other guys around. You wave to them, you say hello, just out of respect. No, nothing like that. And they pinched us after 3 weeks. And I'm looking at like a 2 to 4 on a bookmaking charge in the state. And it's not even my gig. I'm there 21 days.
That's crazy. So whatever happened with the guy that said that he got robbed for the 170?
Later on down the road, well, why they held me back, this was later on when I came home from that bid. They were all still away. I wind up copping out to a 6.5 and going to Rikers Island instead of doing a 1 to 3. And I came home and nobody's around. They're saving money for one of the guys that's still away. And that's the money that got robbed. They go to the bank. They go to the box to put money in one day. And they want to go in with the kid to see the money. The kids hesitate. And they crack the kid. Kid takes them in. The box is empty.
Damn.
So then it becomes a whole big thing. It becomes, Lucchese thing, a Gambino thing. We're not even made yet. We're sitting down with guys, and the guy comes over and goes, his brother was a made guy with the Lucchese. That's how the connection was. But his brother wanted nothing to do with him. It was like, watch this. It was like, go ahead, guys. So he came up with a plan. He's like, listen, I have a pharmaceutical thing going on. I don't know any of this at the time. Now I'm moving and shaking. I'm just getting home. I'm trying to get my feet wet. I hit the ground running with the drug game again. As soon as I get done with the bullshit bid on Rikers Island. And he calls me up and he's like, none of us are supposed to see each other. We got parole, probation. They have paper in the state too, meaning like you can't see your co-defendants. And when you get pinched for enterprise corruption, it's OC, they stamp your record, organized crime automatically. So he calls me up. We have a meeting. He's like, listen, about this Vicodin thing. At the time, it was Vicodins, Percocets and Oxys. It was big, but it wasn't big yet, as big as it was today, or has it been? And I'm like, yeah, I know a little something about it. I knew guys that were selling prescriptions of Xanax, of Vicodin. I'm like, yeah, I've heard about it. I said, there's a little profit to be made. He says, yeah, but on a large scale. I said, wow, I'm sure there's a large profit. Just point me in the right direction. I'll do something with it if it's the drug game. He's like, well, listen, I got to get back this amount of money. And then whatever you make on top of it, that's up to you. And if you keep it going with the guy, that's also up to you. Nobody's home yet. Just one or two of us are home. And I was like, all right, make the introduction, and he's like, he wanted me to keep a tight leash on the guy because that was my thing. I kept an eye on the street guys and the drug dealers for my crew. So I meet the guy through him. Now he's a May guy that introduces me. He can't touch the stuff. And we come up with an idea. Every week he's going to bring me a certain amount of pills. I'm going to sell them. I'm going to give them a certain amount every week to get their money paid back. And I'm going to make something on the back end from both of them, plus what I make with the pills. I'm like, we're all going to make money all the way around. So I'm like, all right, I'll take care of it. So this was known in our crew that I'm selling drugs, because they really couldn't put it down that I was selling drugs because I never made it. I wasn't out in the corners doing hand to hands,
Right.
direct sales or anything. So they can never say he's 100% a drug dealer. And the cars, the jewelry, the life, the gossip, yeah, but they didn't know who my connection. They didn't know who I was selling it to. So this time they knew. It was them who put me to it. So
when you say pharmaceuticals, like now you're kind of speaking my language now, because that's what I was into, is the opiates and the Xanax and all that shit. So I know you said you weren't going to the doctor or getting scripts, so you were just buying straight like 1,000
bottles like this.
Yeah, pharmacy bottles, right?
Sealed pharmacy, never opened them, because there was a few people that I knew that got addicted to the stuff. And they were like, oh, they were around Hootie. He was probably giving to them. Listen, it came to the point I was getting 30 of them. I was doing 30,000 a week. So I was getting 30 sealed bottles, taking them and dropping them off. Never handing them out, never piecing them out. I always would just find one person. It came to a point where whatever I got, I couldn't keep. I didn't have enough of it. So I would find one person out of the 10 people that wanted it, just give them the whole thing. I didn't want to piece it out and make everybody happy.
And that, when you say like Vicodin, that's even before like the Roxys and Oxys hit, right?
I'm talking about the Vicodins that had HP on them. Remember them?
Yeah.
They were like fluorescent greens.
Yeah.
All the real deal.
The green bombers.
Hydrocodone across them, they would say. Like, footballs, the football hard big ones that were like horse was cut at the tips. Like the real deal shit. And it wasn't Percocet. These were 10 milligram, non-generic, hardcore Vicodin.
Yeah. So that was before, like it like you were saying, that's, man, like 5 years after that is really when like that shit was really booming. So you kind of
came home.
Yeah. So you got your feet wet early in the pill game.
If I didn't get pinched, I would have been off and running. I was making 15,000 a week. I was making 50 cents a pill. Could you imagine?
That's
guys
crazy.
Make $1 a milligram. I was pushing them for like $1.25 for 10 milligrams, and I was still making 50 cents a piece. Like, the prices were just insane. I couldn't believe it. I knew I would have been off and running, but then by the time I came home, I'm like, I'm gonna rip through this game now. I knew it backwards and forwards, but then they were hitting guys with 10 years. I was like, what the fuck happened while I was away?
You're like,
right, because you know what happened? The biggest thing was people used to be like, chew the Vicodin, don't swallow them. Then it came into where everybody started sniffing pills and then shooting. Like, there was stages to that. They'd be like, you know how disgusting it is to eat a prescription pill.
Right.
But they said it would get into your system and it's a better high, chew them. Because we didn't know. We would eat them, party a little bit, drink on them, get laid. You know how it was, Vicodins. They were like a young man's Viagra. You go all night. You go all night on them, but I never really got into it. It wasn't my thing. But we got curious about it, and to us, it was like, all right, this is something that's made pharmaceutical by scientists. It's not crack cocaine. But when I came home, the epidemic was through the roof.
It's worse than crack.
Listen, I lived through the crack epidemic. Crack was bad, but for some reason, crack had its limitations. You never heard anybody ODing on crack. The mayor of DC's in a hotel smoking crack. You never. It's just, and I don't knock it. If I was a guy who voted, I probably would have voted for the guy. I heard the guy did a great job down there. I don't knock that shit because you're doing drugs or you're getting high. You're putting a needle in your arm. To me, that's something different. When you got a pair of works and you're driving around a pair of work, you know what that means. Said you run around with the works on you, that's something different, you know, because I know guys that got pulled over for suspended license and did the heroin, they would give up murders because they didn't want to spend the night in the pen because they didn't want to kick. You know, I know guys that did a lot of bad shit because of that stuff. Those
Yeah,
as well.
they
When I
say
came
that's
home,
why the mafia wanted to keep away from the heroin, because when somebody gets caught and they're going to get dope sick, they're going to talk quick.
I seen it myself.
Yeah, yeah.
I nursed a guy on my last bid in 2015 when I came home from the feds. I wound up spending 120 days on Rikers Island. I got pinned. I wasn't adapting. I didn't go back to organized crime because I walked away from it. I walked away from it 4 years before, like a year into my bid, because I seen a captain cry. My captain left me for dead in a fight. I just wanted out of the life, going back to the streets. That's what I thought. But then I'm like, you know what? I could work. Even though I never really worked, I had union jobs, I had union books, I had no-show jobs, the whole nine. I was into everything. I made sure I met the right people, I shook the right hands, that I'd be set. So I was like, I'll go to work. I wound up getting shunned from the unions, so I had to go work for minimum wage. That's, a whole other story. I had to start my life all over again. The BMWs, the Lexuses, the houses, the cars, it was all gone. And I actually walked to work 4 miles there, 4 miles home for a year. I didn't even have a car to get back and forth.
That'll humble you up.
But I was humbled as a child, having nothing and not realizing it, not caring about what the rich kids had, not crying about it. Went out and earned it on my own and got it. So
when was the first time that you actually went to prison?
Well, upstate prison or Rikers Island, because Rikers Island's worse than any prison I've been in.
All right, so let's go ahead and start with Rikers Island then, because I've heard crazy shit there. When was the first time you did like a significant amount of time in Rikers Island?
Well, the greatest thing in the world was I was selling the pills. I was giving the pills to the president of a drug program. And he was
sounds about right though.
but you know what? It wasn't pushing them to the addicts. He had a hook with the Hells Angels and they needed them, and he was giving them the $30,000 a week, So what happened was I was 30 days into my bid. But when you get sentenced, because I'm out on bail, you go to something called the 6 building on Rikers Island, which is you go to work, you do 120 days out of the 6 months, and you go home. It's nothing. It's like a part of Rikers Island. You're like, oh, thank God. I made it. I think I made it there for a week. I never really got to see the 6 building or experience it, because this guy wound up going to court for me and presenting them with a letter stating that I was selling drugs to keep up with this habit. And nobody knew what this habit was yet, not even the judges. Because even I actually went to a drug program for 7 days. I had to do a 28-day program. I had to pay like $5,000. I went to a nice place and I got a kidney stone. Well, they thought it was a kidney stone. I think it wound up being like a urinary tract. They thought it was a kidney stone. And the hospital in the drug program prescribed me Vicodin. And I was eating Vicodin the whole time in the program because they didn't even know what it was yet. And I didn't know anything about drug programs. I'm hearing stories about robbing your mother's pocketbook, selling your ass. Well, this guy happens to go to the court after I get sentenced because I was supposed to get probation. So I jumped on something called a global plea to help everybody else out, which is something I jumped off of in the feds, and they labeled me a rat. So, which I don't mind being labeled a rat. I played because after that I went in, I played Queen for a day, and all my friends now are former true street guys and true gangsters that turned their lives around, and they never informed if they flipped and turned testified or went to the grand jury. That's different to me. If you inform or you take a paycheck and you're a cooperator, there's something different about that. Or if you're giving up one of your friends in Cosa Nostra life, you get called to a sit down and you know that they're asking you questions that could wind up getting your friend stabbed, a hand cut off, acid poured on, things that Cosa Nostra did or clipped. That's to me, that's a rat. That's a rat, because there was a lot of times I was put into, with bosses asking me questions, and not that I lied, but I was a good talker, so I talked my way around it to get guys out of trouble. But to me, that's a rat move. Not what me and guys that I'm associating with now that change their lives are doing.